The restaurant was full, every table booked. Champagne was being poured, and the mayor of Atlanta was in the third booth from the left, laughing at something O.C. said, and O.C. was standing there in his tailored ivory suit, looking like a man who had never once in his life made a single mistake. That was the plan, anyway. He had sent the invitation 6 weeks earlier. Hand-delivered. The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, the kind of paper that costs more than it should, and inside was a card that said, "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of Ose's Kitchen, Atlanta's premier dining experience." And at the bottom, in smaller print, handwritten in blue ink, "I think you should be there, Nadia, to see what you almost had." Nadia Owusu held that card for a long time. She was sitting at her kitchen table in the apartment on Glenwood Avenue, the one with the cracked tile by the refrigerator and the window that didn't close all the way in the winter. Her daughter Amma was doing homework at the other end of the table, 8 years old and completely unbothered by the world. Her son Kojo was asleep in the next room, 5 years old, still too young to understand why they didn't live in the big house anymore. Nadia read the card twice. Then she set it down and went back to stirring her soup. She didn't cry. She had used up her crying months ago. Let's go back 3 years, because you need to understand what Ose took from her before you can understand what she built without him. Nadia grew up in her grandmother's kitchen in Accra. Not cooking, learning. There is a difference. Cooking is following a recipe. Learning is watching your grandmother's hands, the way she adds palm oil like she's making a decision, not just pouring, the way she tastes a broth and adjusts without measuring anything, knowing by feel and smell, and something you can only call instinct if you haven't spent your whole childhood watching it get passed down. Nadia's grandmother called it the knowing. Her mother had it, her aunties had it. And Nadia had it in a way that made her grandmother stop one afternoon, look at her with something like reverence, and say, "My daughter, your hands were made to feed people." She came to Atlanta on a student visa at 22, food science degree. She met Ose Darko at a church picnic in her second year. Handsome, charming, already talking about opening a restaurant, already dreaming big in that way men do when they haven't yet been tested by anything real. Nada believed in the dream because she believed in him. She also believed in it because it was her dream too. They married when she was 24. Amma came first, then Kojo, and in between the pregnancies and the nursing and the sleepless nights, Nadia was in the kitchen they rented on weekends developing recipes. Not just recipes, a whole culinary language. West African flavors rebuilt from the ground up for an American palate, not fusion in the cheap sense, not jollof rice with a poached egg on top. Something more serious, something that made people put down their forks and say, "What is that?" The way you say it when you mean "I have never tasted this before, but somehow it already feels like home." The restaurant was Nadia's idea. The name was Ose's idea. The capital came from a loan Nadia's uncle helped secure. The recipes, every single one, came from Nadia's hands and Nadia's memory and what her grandmother had put into her over 20 years of standing in that kitchen in Accra. Ose ran the front of the house. Nadia ran the kitchen. For 2 years it worked. Then it didn't. Ose had a way of making you feel like you were imagining things. That was his real talent. Not charm, though he had that too, but the specific skill of reframing reality until you doubted your own memory. He would do something, say something cutting in front of his friends, dismiss her opinion in a meeting with the investors, take credit for a dish she had worked on for 3 months, and when she brought it up later, he would look at her with this expression that was almost sad, almost concerned, and say, "Nadia, I don't know why you always do this. I don't know why you make everything a conflict." And she would stand there in her own kitchen and think, maybe I am. She wasn't. The divorce papers came on a Thursday. She hadn't seen them coming, which tells you something about how good he was at it. He had already spoken to a lawyer. He had already, it turned out, transferred the restaurant's operating license into his name alone 18 months earlier. She hadn't noticed because she trusted him, and because she was busy, always busy, running a kitchen and raising 2 children and trying to keep everything from falling apart. He had documentation suggesting the recipes were developed under the restaurant's commercial license and therefore belonged to the business, which he now solely owned. The judge gave Nadia $600 a month in child support for 2 children, the restaurant, the house, the car. All of it went to Osei. She left with her kids and a suitcase and a notebook. The notebook was spiral-bound, green, the edges soft from use. It had every recipe in it, handwritten, every ratio, every technique, every note she'd made over years of development. She had been writing things down since she was a teenager watching her grandmother cook. Osei's lawyers had argued the recipes belonged to the business. What they didn't know, what Osei didn't know either, because he had never paid that kind of attention, was that the notebook only contained most of the recipes, the foundations, the structures, what made them hers, the deepest layer, the part she had never written down, because some things you don't commit to paper, some things you carry only in your body. That nobody could touch. The first 8 months were the kind of hard that rearranges you permanently. Nadia and her 2 children shared a 1-bedroom apartment with her friend Abina's cousin on the south side of Atlanta. Not Abina herself, Abina's cousin, a woman named Cynthia who worked nights and slept days and was tolerant but not warm. Nadia slept on the pull-out couch. Ama and Kojo shared the closet-sized second room. She got a job at a catering company. Prep work, $14 an hour. She was overqualified in a way that made the other workers uncomfortable and the supervisor nervous. So, she kept quiet and did what she was told, and came home smelling like industrial fryer oil, and put her children to bed, and sat at the kitchen table with her green notebook and worked on what she was building in her head. She called her grandmother on WhatsApp every Sunday. Her grandmother was 78 and entirely unbothered by bad news. "My daughter," she said once, when Nadia was in the low place, the kind of low where you question everything, you are not a woman who was destroyed. You are a woman being refined. There is a difference. Don't you confuse the two. Nadia wrote that down too. She didn't tell her grandmother about Osei and what he had taken. Not the details. Her grandmother didn't need details. Her grandmother already knew, the way old women know things, and she just kept saying, "Keep cooking, my daughter. Keep cooking every Sunday," until it wasn't advice anymore. It was prophecy. The opportunity came from nowhere, the way real opportunities usually do. The catering company got a contract for a corporate event. Last minute, the head chef called in sick. The supervisor came to Nadia with the look of a man who has no other options. "Can you run it?" She ran it. The menu was supposed to be standard. Salmon, risotto, the kind of food that offends no one and excites no one. Nadia made the salmon with a marinade she'd been developing in her head for 6 months, a ginger and citrus base with a spice blend that came from her grandmother's kitchen by way of her own experiments. She made a side dish that was not on the approved menu, a yam preparation that looked simple and tasted like a full story. She didn't ask permission. She knew she probably should have. She did it anyway. A man came into the kitchen afterward. He was wearing a gray suit that didn't try too hard and carrying a plate he had clearly already eaten and come back for more of. He didn't look like he was used to being ignored, but he also didn't demand attention. He just stood in the doorway of the catering kitchen and said, "Who made the yam dish?" Nadia turned around from the sink. "I did. Can I ask what's in it?" "No," she said, not rudely, just honestly. but I can tell you it took me 12 years to develop." He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "My name is Daniel Asare. I do food investment." Nadia dried her hands on her apron. "I know who you are," she said, because she did. Daniel Asare had backed 4 restaurant concepts in the Southeast over the past decade, 3 of which had gone regional. He was not famous outside of food industry circles, but inside them, he was the kind of name people said carefully, like they were handling something valuable. "You're not surprised to see me," he said. "I'm always in the kitchen," she said. "I don't see who walks in. I only notice when someone comes back for more." He had come back 3 times. She hadn't known that until later. They exchanged cards. Nadia's card was plain white with just her name and number, the kind you print at home, because you can't afford the nice ones yet. She handed it to him without apology, the way her grandmother had taught her to stand in rooms, which was, fully, without explanation. He called her the following Tuesday. What happened next did not happen fast. Anyone who tells you a comeback story happened fast is leaving out the hard part in the middle, which is always the longest part to art. Daniel was not interested in a restaurant. He was interested in a product line. There was, he explained, a gap in the market for serious West African spice blends, not the grocery store versions, not the simplified tourist versions, but the real thing, developed with intention, positioned correctly, priced correctly, sold to an American market that was ready for it, because the American market was always ready for something, before it knew it was ready. Nadia knew her blends could do this. She also knew she needed capital, distribution knowledge, and someone who understood the business side in a way she didn't. Not because she was incapable, but because she had spent 3 years of her marriage being kept away from the business side of things by a man who told her she was better in the kitchen. She had believed him. She would not make that mistake again. They negotiated for 2 months. She kept her catering job while they negotiated. She kept her apartment on Glenwood Avenue with the cracked tile. She drove Amma to school every morning and picked Kojo up from daycare every afternoon and cooked dinner and put them to bed and then sat at the kitchen table with her green notebook and worked. The deal they reached gave Nadia 60% ownership of the brand. Daniel took 40% and handled investment and distribution. The name was hers, Nana Brew and Spice. Her grandmother's nickname had been Nana. Nadia had never called anyone else by that name. The first product launched 8 months later, a Jollof base blend that came with a small recipe card written in Nadia's own voice. Conversational and warm, the way her grandmother talked about food. Not instructional, not clinical, just someone who loves you telling you how to make something good. It sold out in 72 hours on their website. They were not prepared for that. They had to delay the second run. The delay created waiting lists. The waiting lists created buzz. Then a food blogger in Charlotte, the kind with 300,000 followers and a real audience, not inflated numbers, made a video of herself cooking with the blend. She cried a little at the end. She said it tasted like something she couldn't name, but that it made her feel like someone's grandmother was in the kitchen with her. That video reached 2 million people in 4 days. By the time the national grocery chain called, Nadia had already moved out of the Glenwood Avenue apartment. She and her children were in a townhouse in East Atlanta with a real kitchen, the kind with counter space and good light, the kind she had been building recipes in her head for, without a physical kitchen to match. Amma had her own room. Kojo had his own room. They both had that particular quality children get when the anxiety they've been carrying without knowing it finally gets set down. Loose, louder, more themselves. One evening, Amma came into the kitchen while Nadia was testing a new blend. Amma was 10 by then, watching her mother the way Nadia had watched her grandmother. "Mama," Amma said. Are we doing okay now? Nadia looked at her daughter for a moment. She thought about the pull-out couch. She thought about the green notebook. She thought about what her grandmother had said about refinement, not destruction. Baby, she said, we were always doing okay. We just needed more room. Now back to the invitation. The opening of Ose's kitchen was scheduled for a Friday night in November. He had done well, it had to be said. Ose was not without talent. He just had a habit of mistaking other people's talent for his own. The restaurant had press. It had investors. It had a menu that Nadia recognized in her bones because she had built the bones of it herself in their shared kitchen in the years before she understood what was happening. He had adapted her recipes, made them slightly different enough to avoid any legal issue. But the architecture was hers. The logic of the flavor combinations was hers. Anyone who knew what to look for would know. She thought about not going. She thought about it seriously for about 45 minutes while Amma was at soccer practice and Kojo was watching cartoons. Then she thought about that handwritten note at the bottom of the invitation. I think you should be there, Nadia, to see what you almost had. And something in her settled, calm and clear, the way her grandmother's voice sounded on Sunday mornings. She called Daniel. I'm going to the opening Friday, she said. Do you want company? He said. Yes, she said. We're something good. Daniel Asare, you should know, was not the kind of man who announced himself. He was 51, Ghanaian American, and had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having built real things and not needing anyone to know it. He drove a car that was understated for a man of his means. He ate at regular restaurants. He did not have social media. He had, in the 14 months they'd been working together, become something more than a business partner. Neither of them had named it yet, and neither of them was in a hurry to, which was its own kind of answer. He arrived at Nadia's townhouse at 7. Kojo opened the door and immediately said, Are you Mama's friend? In the direct way 5-year-olds have. I am, Daniel said. She's upstairs, Kojo said. She's been up there a long time. Nadia came down the stairs at 7:15 in a dress the color of dark cognac, which is not brown and not gold, but something in between, something warm. She was wearing the earrings her grandmother had sent from Accra when the first grocery chain deal closed. Heavy, traditional, the kind that say something without needing words. She had done her hair up. She looked like a woman who had something to say and had decided to let her presence say it. Daniel looked at her the way men look when they're trying not to react too visibly. You ready? He said. I've been ready for 3 years, she said. Ose's kitchen was on Peachtree. Of course it was. The whole place had been designed to impress. Warm lighting, exposed brick, an open kitchen concept so diners could watch the cooking happen. It was good. Nadia could admit that. It was genuinely well executed, and if she hadn't known where every idea in that room had come from, she might have enjoyed it. She walked in at 7:45 with Daniel beside her and 2 colleagues of his who happened to be in town. Both of them significant in the food and investment world in ways that would become apparent to anyone who Googled their names. She did not make an entrance. She did not need to. She simply walked in. The hostess took them to their table. Nadia looked around the room. She saw the moment Ose saw her, across the restaurant, mid-law with someone from the press. The laugh stopped. Not all the way. He caught it. He was good at catching things like that. But it stopped for just a half second, just long enough. His new girlfriend, a woman named Brianna, who had been with him for 8 months, was seated at the bar. She was watching the room the way people do when they know they're supposed to be having a good time. Nadia didn't know Brianna, but she recognized the look. She had worn that look herself once. A waiter brought menus. Daniel opened his. One of his colleagues looked around the room, with an expression that was professional interest rather than awe, which is how you could tell he was used to rooms like this. They ordered. The food came out. Nadia tasted the first dish, a spiced broth that was meant to be the signature opener, and she set her spoon down gently and said nothing. It was close. It was close in the way a copy is always close, and always missing something. The spice ratio was almost right. The base was almost right. But there was a layer underneath, something low and dark and warm that she had developed over 12 years in her grandmother's kitchen and had never written down, and it wasn't there. The dish was good. It was not what it was trying to be. Anyone with a trained palate would feel the absence, that slight hollowness, like a song played in the wrong key. One of Daniel's colleagues leaned toward him and said quietly, "It's good, but the one you brought to the meeting in September was better." Nadia had developed the blend he was referring to 3 years after leaving this marriage with a green notebook and 2 children and nothing else. Daniel caught her eye. She looked at him and then looked away, out at the room, at the mayor laughing in the third booth, at the servers moving efficiently through the warm light, at Osi, who was now working the room and was getting closer. She could see him coming. When Osi reached the table, he came from behind the confidence of a man on his own ground. "Nadia," he said pleasantly, like he was surprised, like he hadn't put her name on that invitation himself. "I didn't think you'd actually come." She looked up at him. "You invited me," she said. "I did." He glanced at Daniel, at the other 2 men at the table. He was recalculating something behind his eyes. I wanted you to see what we built here." "What you built," she said, evenly. "What I built," he said, correcting himself, and something flickered across his face, something like discomfort, quickly suppressed. "The food is incredible, right? Tell me honestly. The broth is missing something," she said. "It always will be." He stared at her. "Osi," she said, and her voice was not angry and not triumphant, just clear. The way her grandmother's voice was always clear. "You can have the recipe. You just can't have the knowing." She picked up her spoon again. She went back to her dinner. He stood there for a moment, longer than was comfortable. Then he smiled, the PR smile, the one he kept in reserve, and said something that nobody at the table was listening to, and moved on. The announcement went out the following Monday. Nana Brew and Spice secures national distribution deal with major grocery chain, launching Q1 in 200 stores across the United States. It ran in 3 food industry publications and 1 Atlanta lifestyle magazine. The photo they used was Nadia in her kitchen, not the professional kitchen, the one at home, with Amma visible in the background doing homework, and the light coming through the window the way it does in late October, golden and particular. Brianna, it turned out, saw the article. She saw it, and then she apparently went back through the restaurant's opening night photos, which had been posted to Ose's social media, and in one of them you could see, in the background, Nadia at a table across the restaurant, not looking at the camera, just eating and talking. And Brianna sent Ose a screenshot of that photo, alongside a screenshot of the article, and wrote, "I looked her up. 8 months in, you still can't match what she built. What exactly is the plan here?" Nadia didn't know about that exchange until much later, when a mutual friend told her. And when she heard it, she laughed. Not meanly, just honestly, the way you laugh when something confirms what you already understood. Because here is the thing about Ose. He wasn't a villain in the cartoonish sense. He was something more ordinary and therefore more damaging. A man who had looked at a woman building something real and decided it was his to absorb. He hadn't thought of it as taking. He'd thought of it as partnership, merging. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Right up until the moment it wasn't convenient anymore. That kind of man is not rare. What was rare was what Nadia had done next, which was, refused to let the story end there. She hadn't come to his opening to humiliate him. She had come because she was not afraid of him anymore. That was the whole message. That was the only thing she needed to say. She had said it by walking through the door and ordering dinner and going home at 10 o'clock to relieve the babysitter and check on her sleeping children. That was enough. Amma turned 11 the February after the distribution deal launched. Nadia made her a cake from scratch, not a Nana brew and spice product, not something for the market, just a cake, the way her grandmother had made cakes, by memory and by feel, the way the knowing moved through her hands without her having to think about it. Daniel was there. He had started being there for things, not in a way that announced itself, but in a way that accumulated. A school pickup here, a Sunday dinner there, Kojo falling asleep on the couch beside him during a movie, and nobody making a big deal of it. After the cake, after the singing, after Amma and Kojo disappeared into their rooms with the easy confidence of children who know where home is, Nadia and Daniel sat at the kitchen table with tea. She asked me something last week, Nadia said. Amma? She turned her mug. She asked if you were going to be around for a long time. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know, Nadia said, which was honest. She looked at him. But I'm starting to think I do know. He looked back at her, and he didn't say anything for a beat, and then he said, I've known for a while. Nadia smiled. Not the professional smile, not the poised in-a-room smile. The real one, the one her grandmother said lit up her whole face. You could have said something, she said. I was waiting for you to be ready, he said. I know, she said. That's why I trust you. There is something Nadia says when people ask her about the early days, the divorce, the couch in Cynthia's apartment, the $14 an hour, the way Ose's had stood across the courtroom looking like the wronged party in a story where he was the one who had done wrong. She doesn't say it bitterly. She says it the way her grandmother would say it, with that particular West African matter-of-factness that refuses to be dramatic about pain. She says, he tried to take my recipes. What he didn't understand was that the recipes aren't the thing. The knowing is the thing, and the knowing lives in your hands, and your hands go with you wherever you go. Then she usually laughs a little, and then she goes back to whatever she was making. If this story moved something in you, you already know what to do. Subscribe and stay, because there are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is about what happens when people underestimate the wrong woman.